Great. My name is Ari Melber from MSNBC. We're going to moderate a little panel. I'm going to bring everybody out here. You guys come on out. Maybe Blake sit in the middle. And full disclosure, I was cameoed in there, and I'm affiliated with MSNBC. But I thought it was a really dope movie. I'm seeing it for the first time. I thought it was a really great job. Yeah, right? So I'm going to tell you about everybody who's up here, and we're going to have a little bit of a chat. And that's the idea. Blake Zeff, who you met through the film, is our star director and panelist, has worked for Obama, Clinton, Schumer, and we'll get to some of that context, and is someone I've known in politics and media for 2 decades. Darrick Hamilton's the economist we saw in there. Alanna Yudin's an editor, so another creator of the project here. And then we have the author of a little book called It Was All a Dream. We can get into that. It's a biggie quote. And I want to make sure I'm saying it right, Reniqua Allen-Lamphere. Yep. Great, who I got to meet tonight. So this is our panel. Blake, given your background and all the things you have been a part of, why make a documentary like this to tackle what we've learned is a complicated and important story for so many people?
Sure, and first of all, just thank you all for being here. Really, really appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, so I worked in politics for about a decade, and then I worked in journalism for about a decade, and I was not like some sort of established filmmaker just looking for my next big idea. What really happened was, as I said, I'd worked in politics and journalism for so long, and I'd never seen an issue or come across an issue that seemed so important and impactful and was frankly ruining so many lives, millions of lives in this country, and yet seemed so misunderstood by the politicians and the media, to be honest, and by myself and everyone I kind of knew. And as I dug deeper and deeper on this, I thought this isn't just an article. This is a movie. This is, I mean, you guys saw it. There's a lot of layers to this. And so I was really just blown away, and I really felt like there needed to be action here. And so, that's really the goal here, is not just to, expose and explain what happened, but really to try to help create the conditions for change and to motivate people to mobilize and politicians, hopefully, to see this and to have a different view than they used to.
And before I bring in the rest of the panel, something I want to ask you about that I know from knowing you is, how important was it for you to take the odd and super nerdy access you have to this process? Because a lot of journalism and a lot of films come really outside in. You're very open through this, that you're inside out. You work for Chuck Schumer. You're looking at this issue. How important was it to weave that in the story you told? Because I do think it's fundamentally different from the way a lot of external stories work.
Yeah, that's a great question. I felt like that was something that I could potentially offer that maybe others couldn't. I mean, look, I don't want to make it seem like I discovered the student loan crisis. I'm not saying that at all. But what I felt like I could offer is that, yeah, I mean, I didn't know that Senator Schumer was definitely going to say yes, or Durbin or Ayanna Pressley. I was really glad that they did. But what I did know is that I knew how the process worked from the inside, like you said. I'd worked on Capitol Hill for several years. I was able to, my friend Ryan, he's the guy at the window who's explaining how a bill becomes a law. And by the way, it's not how you learned like in Schoolhouse Rock. It's very different. And so having that ability to, understand the process and speak to people, I felt was, something that I could potentially, could differentiate this project and maybe make it, meaningful.
Alanna, how does what we saw today differ from all of the raw footage that you started with?
Well, there's like 10,000 more hours. I mean, if you want to see them, I got them in my room. I mean, but I think like the challenge was really just trying to like balance the, the super wonky stats and facts and figures and just, making sure that we kind of found the balance between all that and the personal stories and the humor, and we were trying to use like the humor and the lighter moments to counterbalance, I guess, what could have been like a very, very boring, dry, didactic film. And yeah, I mean, it was a balance. We went back and forth a lot, and there was a lot of restructuring and a lot of, just making sure that we were hitting that right balance, and we were using the personal stories as effectively as we could, because that was really where you got to see the effects of the actual crisis. So.
And I have a meta documentary question for you, but we are at this festival, so I feel like this is the place for it. How important was it to tell your story, which I think everyone can see very clearly by the end, some of the inequity and the insanity, the bizarre bureaucratic process comes through. How important was it to balance that, which I think you achieved, and the misinformation that is so rampant because that's part of how we got here, and you did that in artful ways, both with media and showing, well, this is why people might be misinformed about this, but you also didn't do it in an overly partisan way. If Tucker Carlson also sees the insanity, then notwithstanding his other white supremacist support for the violent overthrow of this country, which is an issue, that's an issue. But
We
putting
left
that
that
to the
on
side,
the, we left that on the cutting room floor.
yeah,
Didn't
putting that to
seem
the
relevant.
side, if Blake, Tucker, and all these people also see that, how did you use the misinformation out there to tell the story?
I have no idea. How did we use the misinformation out there?
Like
to
all
tell
the clips, to
story?
be specific, all the clips of people being like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, it's welfare queens, quote unquote.
Right.
That kind of talk.
Yeah. I mean, I think, again, it really was just the balance. It was just, it was a point counterpoint type of thing. So, you have your stats and your facts and your figures and the personal stories. And then I think shown against the, what you were just mentioning. I mean, I think that's probably the most effective way to show how disparate those points of view are.
Yeah, and I think I would just echo something you just hinted at, Ari, which was when you said sort of not partisan. I didn't want this to be, it's tempting to kind of make it a very partisan thing, but I really wanted to try to persuade people who had an open mind and, would be willing to watch. That's why we have Tucker Carlson. I don't know if Tucker Carlson will admit that he feels this way now, but these clips are from a few years ago, so it's really kind of interesting. But yeah, and then also obviously we have Ike Brannon, the conservative economist who worked for John McCain, and we've got Wayne Johnson, who was in the Trump administration, who said this is insane, and that was obviously intentional, right? We're trying to show that this is something that reasonable people on both sides are worried about. And in terms of the use of the news clips, some of that is, you do want to show the other side.
Right, and stressing also just how, that these are, I guess, people who are seen as extremely on the right. And so, anyway, sorry, I'm nervous up here.
You're doing great. You're doing
Thanks.
great. Reniqua,
I'm
what
usually in a dark edit room, and I don't
Yeah.
have to talk to anybody.
But it's a documentary festival. You're here because of what you do. Reniqua, what does the student loan crisis tell us about America?
I mean, I think it tells you, as I think Blake so eloquently laid out, that the system is fucked up. Like, that.
Again with the language. Did everyone notice?
I know my mom is in the audience and probably gonna come in. No, I think it tells you that there is something fundamentally wrong with how we're approaching this. I mean, and it is. I think the bankruptcy issue is really illustrative of an important part of it. But as one gentleman mentioned too, college costs are also insane. It's a whole system that is flawed and that we need to get behind, and that I think we also need to, and I'm glad you mentioned, the American dream. We need to stop selling this idea to people that if you just work hard enough, you will get ahead, because I think what it shows is that's actually not what's happening to people who mean well, right? These are generally people who, want to do the right thing and are just constantly getting left behind. It's really, it's sad. I think you found a great way to bring humor to it, but it does tell us, I think, that, we need to wake up. There's a problem in America, and it is not just a partisan thing. It's not just impacting Democrats or blue states or red states. It is something that is impacting everyone. So I do hope that it can get everyone on board, because it's something so profound. And just for the millennial angle, it is something millennials, Gen Z are really grappling with even more so, even if, the staggering inflation figures now that we're seeing, it's something that I think is really hitting these generations, and we're seeing the impact of it, and we will continue to see that.
Although if as a generation you come together to ruin casual dining, then there will be consequences. There will be consequences. Reniqua, when you look at every issue of inequity or struggle in America then has a racial component underneath it. So there's the deliberate or discriminatory racism, and we know about that in our history, and then there's the other concomitant ways that these things are reinforced. Given that the film makes a point of bringing that in, and we also look at a next generation coming up of however you want to say it, black and brown people running for office to try to change the system. What are your thoughts on that wider ambit that we tell young people, and you know you're getting old when you say young people. It's like, I must be over 40. We tell young people, here's these things you got to do: school, home ownership, and then the data on what that requires for black and brown Americans is even harder than everyone else.
Yeah, I think we need to stop telling them that. Just plain blank. Like, it's not working for this generation. And I don't want to say that, look, I have a PhD, right? Like, and I'm not sure if I needed that. I was talking about that earlier. I don't want to say that it doesn't totally pay off, because things like going to college, and especially when you talk about young black, brown Americans, immigrant children, poor Americans in general, it does help. Going to college, by far, it does help. And was that, $200,000 worth it for some people? That's, a decision that people have to make. I think what we have to do is say that that's not the only path to success. We have to work on things like strengthening unions, which do help black and brown people in incredibly high rates. There are other things that need to come into play, but just working hard and going to college, we have to stop telling people that. That is a dream. That's problematic, and that's just not the way America's working anymore.
Yeah, really interesting. And we're going to come... In TV, we call it a tease when I tell you what's going to happen later. So within 3 to 5 minutes, we're going to bring The Economist in. But not yet. All right, that's a tease. That's like coming up. Because Blake told me you're here partly to talk about the solutions, so I want to kind of get to that as we wrap. But while we're in the middle of the story, Blake, the fact that it is a whodunit, right? When Merrick Garland does not get even a hearing in the Senate, despite being appointed by the president, it's not a whodunit, right? Everyone's like, Mitch McConnell did that. How do you feel about it? And Republicans loved it, and Democrats didn't, and a lot of independent experts didn't. Here, you tell the story as a whodunit. I wonder if you could tell us why you chose to do it that way, and is there anything substantive that you're getting at, that this person who is what we would call a rando in government, who then is living his trucking life, which is cool, like shout out to doing what you want to do, that he did the thing that affects tens of millions. So tell us about that, both as a storyteller and if it matters to the substance.
Yeah, and this was really authentic to, how I lived it. When I first found out about the importance of this bankruptcy rule, which I didn't really get at first. At first I was like, well, why would people want to file for bankruptcy? I say in the thing, when you watch Wheel of Fortune, that's a bad thing. People are like sad. But as I learned that was really a structural issue, I thought, okay, why don't we talk to the person who was behind this? And maybe they have a good reason, or maybe they've changed their mind, or maybe they want to advocate for reconsidering it. It was a very honest process. And then I learned that we didn't know who was behind it. No one copped to it. And I thought, that's really messed up. And so then it became a process, really an organic process of trying to find this person. I reached out to my friend Ryan, who really is a really top legislative person in D.C. And he was like, beats me, but these are the 3 people I think it might be. So a lot of it was just the organic, journey that I was on. But in terms of what I think that illustrates is kind of the insanity of the process. I mean, ultimately, the fact that some non-elected bureaucrat who none of us had ever heard of had this idea, what some might call a brain fart of an idea, and slipped it in and gave it to the Senate. They slipped it in at the last minute. But the thing that really shocked me was Dick Durbin, Senator Durbin at the end, who I think is one of the heroes on this issue, says, yeah, I voted for that, but I had no idea it was even in it. And I'm like, what? I mean, on some level, it was like, I don't know if I'd admit that on camera, but but it really does tell you a lot about this process. So that for me was really, yes, this is about student loans, but it's also to me about our democracy, about our democratic process, how a bill becomes a law, and how people are voting for things they haven't even read, they don't even know about. And then, by the way, this has been going on for 20 years, and they haven't fixed it. So for me, it was about democracy as much as this particular issue.
Alanna, how does that work to show some of the people? Because he's not caricatured as a villain, but I think a fair reading is it's completely bananas.
Yes.
And then his attitude towards it speaks to what you might call the problem with too much arbitrary power.
Right.
Right? As Blake was explaining, he's unaccountable. And without him, maybe this wouldn't be the system that affect all these other people's lives. So how do you, as a filmmaker, weave in these people into the story?
Right. So, I mean, that's really what it was. It was about we called it the peppering, right? Yeah. So it was just a matter of, peppering in the, the personal stories, the lighter moments with these like very, very heavy moments. I mean, watching Buck McKeon is not fun. Watching David Longenecker is not fun. I mean, these are just like old, like not that easy on the eyes white guys. So, it was just about how can we...
Gee, thanks.
Yeah, well, what? No, you looked great. Oh. You looked great, especially next to them. No, you were fantastic.
You see what I did there? Very intentional.
Really. It's part of that point-counterpoint thing I was talking about. So, so that's what it was. And it was just about, building up, letting the people's story play, letting them make a case for it, and then kind of like the whammy of seeing David Longenecker completely negate everything that we've been seeing for the last hour. So.
Can I say one thing about what Alanna is doing, because she's, I think, being modest? Something with documentaries that's different from other films, like if you have a scripted film, the whole thing is scripted out, it's storyboarded, and you kind of know what you're doing, right? Documentary is very different, as I learned, because we shot so many hours of footage, and there's so much involved in this, and then you kind of hand it over to the editor and say, please try to make it make sense and make a story out of this. And so, the interview with David Longenecker, the culprit, if you will, the truck driver, that was like an hour and a half or something like that. And Alanna is in what did I call it? Like your small little room, your sad little room.
Yeah,
she's like in a sad little room,
it was
editing with all the footage.
It was mean, but it became funny.
Sorry about that. And trying to pick out the moments that are fair. And accurate representations, but are the most interesting. And that's a really hard thing to do. And even these subtle things, like when Longenecker is talking and says some things that are like, huh? And she has these little stings or these sound effects where it's like, ding.
Can everyone tell I come from a reality TV background?
But we want you to know that that's something to kind of like, keep an eye on. All that stuff is done, by the editor. So while I'm on this note, I do want to take a moment, whether this is, I don't know if this is, I'm doing my own tease now. I don't know if this is coming later, but I do want to take a moment to mention that there's a lot of people here today who work behind the scenes on this film that I personally would like to thank and recognize. And if you worked on the film or in the film, like for example, Marcella, one of the stars of the film, is here. If you wouldn't mind standing up if you were part of the film, if you worked on the film or were in the film, that would be great. We have our producers. Most of them are in the front row. But thank you all for being part of this. And, it's when you watch this, and just talking about Alanna, reminding me of this, it may look like there's just a few people who work on this. There's a huge team. I mean, there's numerous producers and graphics people, and as I'm looking at Tori and I see her, and one of our camera operators is here. It really is a huge. And you see the credits at the end, but I just wanted to acknowledge that, and I also wanted to congratulate all of you in the audience because you sat through 90 minutes of content about bankruptcy. How a bill becomes a law, 1998 legislative history, a little bit about Viagra. So thank you all for your patience as well.
Amazing. Before we turn to policy, as promised, the last question for you, Blake, also fitting for this festival is, now we've seen the doc. It looked like a real documentary, right? Like, for real. Like, I was sitting there because I've known him a long time.
Thank you.
I'm like, and I talked to his parents before, Blake's parents. They were like, well, here we are. It's a great thing. And I imagine inspiring to some people that at whatever age, at whatever time, as you mentioned, team effort, hard work. But this is your first documentary, Blake. So I think appropriate question before we turn to policy is, did you feel good with that the whole time? Did it take some practice interviews and walking around? You insert yourself into it in a very authentic way with your life, your family, with Patty's loans. Did you feel the whole time like, yeah, this is definitely a legit doc, or did you have some of that apprehension, which I think is something that people always wonder about if someone is looking at this going, maybe I could make one of these?
I mean, working with amazing pros like I did really put me at ease that this was, thank you, this could be a real doc. But the thing that I really was, somewhat uneasy with is I'm in the movie so damn much. And I was like, people are going to be very sick of me, and then we're going to do a panel afterwards. So that was the thing where I was like, and we talked about this a lot, internally, was do I need to be in this much? And the feeling was that there's a lot, you mentioned this balance, Ari and Alanna, which is like we have personal stories, we've got experts, we're explaining different things, we've got the whodunit. we're talking about bankruptcy. There's all these different things that kind of could potentially be boring or inaccessible or sad or just disparate. And so the idea was maybe having a tour guide, like me, this Blake character, could potentially like sew it all together and maybe make it all kind of make sense. But that was the thing that I was like, should I really be in this movie this much? So that was kind of the thing that I was always wondering about.
Well, it came through really well, I thought, because I'm not a documentary expert, so I can't speak to that with any great rigor. But in terms of storytelling, it struck me that this is an issue that has been otherized and that's fallen into the tropes, the narratives, intergenerational clashes, name a generation something, attach some cliches, and then on top of that have what is kind of not even a right-wing agenda, just maybe an anti-student and alumni agenda, right? If you show that Powell and Tucker and others also don't think it makes sense. But by you de-otherized it, I thought, by showing that this is something many people are facing. Your family faces it, other people face it, and that, I think, really brings people along. So that's just something that struck out to me as a real positive. Anything from you three before we go to policy and then wrap, and there's a little reception?
Well, I just want to say I really enjoyed working on the film, and I knew really nothing about it. I was probably just the right person to work on it in that way because I was learning as I went along.
And what did you think about the way the film explains these both economic and policy issues? And would you, you're not going to sort of fact check what you just saw, but is there, because it's kind of a funny question, but is there anything that you would add to that and that we should know?
I love the film's narration, ability to present the problem, but also personify it. That's the way you compel people and spur movements. But in the end, it certainly is more than about, I want to mispronounce his name, Longfellow. Yeah. Right? So that provision is key, and it shows all the dynamic impacts associated with that provision. That provision allows for the cost of education to keep rising and rising and rising. But there was a point in history, and some people in this room probably did go to college without leaving with large sums of debt. So historically, we have been able to provide college degrees without debt. So I guess the answer to your question would be the problem is beyond that clause, but the solution is grounded in history and how we got to the point where we are today. I dare say here's where race comes into it, whether subtly or obviously. In that period when we did offer people a college degree without debt, which was part of the building of America's biggest middle class in our history, part of that New Deal, Great Society, GI Bill, et cetera, as black people started to go to college more, and that's not the sole reason, the view about a debt-free college education started to change. We can look at the contributions of resources from the federal government that go towards education. They diminished over time. So part of the problem, and I'll say this about student loan also, and this was alluded to in the film as well, the typical black student 4 years after graduation has about $53,000 in debt. The typical white student, $28,000, which is intolerably too high. But $53,000 for a degree that costs you more, that also has less of an economic return in the marketplace, is a problem. So I think in the end, we all need to recognize that the economics of it, the politics of it, as well as the way in which we divide society into who we think is deserving and undeserving, namely race, are all tied together. And not only did it affect black people, clearly it's impacting white people and all Americans as well.
Yeah, I have nothing to add to that. I think that's exactly right. And I have two updates, though, I do want to mention about this issue that just occurred to me before we go. One is sad and one is happy. I'll do the sad one first. The sad one, as Dr. Hamilton and I were talking about before we got up on stage, is, so we mentioned at the end that President Biden, I'm sure you guys all know, that President Biden put this plan forward that we allude to at the very end to cancel up to $10,000 of student debt for some people. And actually, for some, it'll be $20,000 if you had Pell Grants. That is now being halted in court. Some conservative activists have brought that to court. They have failed in many courts, and we've got the chief legal correspondent, who, although sometimes it seems like he has a different beat, as we noted in the movie, who can add to this maybe.
Did you hear the beat reference?
Yeah. But currently, right now, that's being halted by I believe it's a court in Texas, and so that doesn't mean that's the end of the story. It's being appealed by the Biden administration, but I just wanted to note that that's where we're at right now, just in the interest of accuracy, and also because I think it's relevant to what Dr. Hamilton just said. Because don't trick yourself. This is very political when these kinds of things happen, and this is about ideology. The second thing that's more happy is Carrie, who's in our film, who's the one who served in the military, and she we noted that she's running for the assembly now. Well, last week, I'm happy to tell you, she won her election, and she's now a member of this Delaware State Assembly. So that's very exciting.
Wow.
And she would have been here, but she won, and now she's got to, get her office going and all that kind of stuff. But that's exciting. So.
Did you have anything to add, Reniqua?
I don't.
Okay. Your book, It Was All a Dream, is, as many people probably know, a nod to the great Brooklyn rapper, Notorious B.I.G. You guys know that, right? It Was All a Dream. Used to read Word Up magazine. You want to finish it, Darrick? Salt and pepper, heavy D up in a limousine? No? Okay.
I'm trying to keep my job.
But the song that you named your book after begins also with Biggie saying, this is dedicated to all the teachers. And if you stop there, depending on your life experience, you'd say, oh yeah, I like teachers. Like I had some great teachers in my life. And he says, who said I'd never amount to anything? Because that was his experience with the education system. So as we close up, Reniqua, I was just curious, any final thoughts, given how much you've written about this, and this connects with both who goes to school and the rest of their lives. Any final thoughts you wanted to share as we wrap up?
No, I think it is. I do think we need to really think about the system as a whole. I do think, as Blake said, it is about democracy, I think. And what's happening to it now, I think we really need to look into D.C. and figure out what's going on and why so many people feel like their dreams can't be realized. I'll connect it back to the song, because I feel like that, it does feel like, dreams can't happen anymore. And this is the narrative of this country of America, right? This American dream is like this foundational thing that we tell ourselves. Some people say it's the greatest contribution of America to the world. This idea that if you can work hard, you can do everything. And I think something like student debt, particularly bankruptcy, and the fact that you can't get an education anymore, the fact that it is impacting people of color, young people of color, who are, overwhelmingly Americans, who are, our future, who are the majority of society, is really frustrating, and we need to do better.
Amen. Well, I'll give it over to Blake for the final word to close us out. Everyone's welcome to come to the reception. I think a lot of us will be there hanging out. I want to thank Doc NYC Fest. I want to thank MSNBC, which, full disclosure or not, I think it's great that MSNBC is broadcasting what is a great documentary, an important issue with a lot of work left to be done so people can be informed. I always say in my work, people can make up their own minds. Indeed, when you try to tell other people too much of what to think, you might undermine your own persuasion. But this is a project that's very worthwhile, where people, by the end of watching it, will know a lot more, so they can then be informed about the future debates. There's a lot more to do on it. So with that said, thanks to everyone. And Blake, why don't you close us out?
Just actually going to echo, because you said exactly what I was going to say, which is that there is a reception after this. I think as we file out, people will be able to show you where that is. Everyone in the theater is invited to come. We'll be there, so please join us. I also do want to acknowledge a couple of institutions or entities. Doc NYC has been so supportive of this film. I'm really glad to say that we sold out tonight, but they've added 2 other screenings, which is incredible. Tomorrow night, they're going to be doing another panel, and then again on Thursday, they're going to be screening this film. So thank you, Doc NYC. Really appreciate you supporting this film and really this issue. This issue is really so important, so thank you to them. I'd like to thank Original Productions. It's the production company that helped us make this, and a lot of those folks are here. Thank you so much. And then, of course, like Ari said, MSNBC really took a chance on a first-time filmmaker. Amanda Spain and the whole team has been amazing. A dream to work with. Really just been anything you possibly could have asked for. So thank you so much, and thank you, Ari, for moderating, and for all our panelists as well.